Welcome to this comprehensive course on building robust desktop applications using Electron, React, and TypeScript. Throughout this course, you'll learn everything from setting up your development environment to implementing advanced features like data visualization, secure communication, and custom window frames, all while ensuring a seamless user experience. Niklas Zimmerman developed this course.
Hey there, I'm Niklas Zimmermann. I'm a full-time software engineer from Germany and I absolutely love web development, which is why I'm so excited that there's stuff like Electron that allows me to combine my web dev and my Node.js skills into one singular cross-platform app that will run on Windows, Mac, and Linux. And we're going to build an app like this right here today, which is going to be a resource manager inspired by the Windows Task Manager Performance tab. So basically some pretty graphs about your CPU, RAM, and storage usage. But before we'll do that, let's take a look at how Electron actually works and why you might want to use it. Alright, so what actually is Electron? Well, as I already mentioned, it's a tool to build cross-platform desktop apps with JavaScript, HTML, and CSS, or alternatively, something like React to replace these three things. And some popular apps that already use Electron are, for example, Discord or Visual Studio Code, which you probably already know that it exists. Alright, so how does Electron actually do all of this? Well, let's try to visualize an Electron app. So this big blue box is going to be our app, and we're of course going to need to have some way to open up a window. So Electron calls these things browser windows. So actually a window of a bundled browser that can display our HTML, CSS, and JavaScript. And Electron creates this window because it actually bundles a whole version of Chromium. So basically every time you download Discord, VS Code, or whatever Electron app, you will actually download a whole Chromium browser that Electron controls under the hood to display and hide windows and interact with them. So basically what this browser window does is just one window of a Chromium browser that you downloaded with your Electron app. But of course, rendering isn't enough. We also want some information about the system, like for example, how much RAM we're using. And the way we can do that is using the main Electron process. And this main process is basically just a Node.js app. So you can imagine that when you start your Electron app, this main process will boot up and it will do some of the tasks that it's designed to do. The main task, of course, in the beginning is creating windows / interacting with Electron. So basically interacting with the Electron lifetime, opening windows, reacting to windows being closed, closing windows itself, whatever you need to do. All of this can be done, and you can even create multiple windows. So you could also have like 3 of these if you need it. In our case, we just need 1, but it is possible. Then again, Electron can of course do much more. For example, it can interact with system APIs. So system APIs could be something like the system tray to create icons like the ones you see up here on the right on macOS, or down on the bottom right in the taskbar of Windows systems. And the most important part for our use case, it is of course just a Node app. So it can use Node modules. So basically most of the things hosted on NPM, and of course the built-in Node stuff as well. So the FS module, the OS module, or even something like Express if you wanted your Electron app to also host a web server for whatever reason or whatever. In our case, we're going to use some helper libraries to get more information about our system, like the memory usage, for example, but most of this could also be used using Node standard libraries. But what's important right here is these are separate processes. So you can imagine that there's basically a thin line between the two that separates them from each other. So this guy can't use code from this guy and vice versa. So how can I actually get data from and to the Electron app using the browser window? Well, there's actually one thing in between these two, or multiple things, but mainly one thing. And this is the IPC event bus, which is basically a third really, really tiny process that allows both the main process and the window processes to publish events under a certain name with some data, and then listen to these events to basically get some data back. So you could imagine that maybe the window publishes, hey, I want to delete object number 42. And then the main process tells every window, hey, entity 42 was deleted. Please update your UI so that it isn't displayed anymore. Stuff like that. And this is inherently how these two different processes can communicate with each other. And now that we understand how Electron does all of this, let's now actually get into what technologies we're actually going to be using to, first of all, develop our app and then actually turn it into an EXE. Because Electron actually can't turn stuff into EXEs, DMGs, MSIs, app images, whatever. You need an extra tool for that. So let's try to visualize our tech stack. So down on the bottom, both for the front-end and for the back-end, we're going to be using TypeScript. Then we'll separate the back-end and the front-end into two separate stacks, basically. So right here, we've of course got Electron. And on the other side, we've got React. Now the question is, how are we actually going to turn all of this into a fully fledged Electron app? Well, first of all, we need to bundle our React app to actually have HTML files in the end. And for that, we're going to be using Vite, which is just a bundler that allows us to really easily and effectively create HTML out of our React that is fast and small, which is really helpful for our use case. And then we, of course, also need to bundle basically all of this into a finished Electron app. And for that, we're actually going to use Electron Builder, which is one of many tools that can be used to basically convert your normally Node.js Electron app into a fully fledged EXE, app image, whatever you need for your specific system needs. So you could create an installer, you could create a portable app, whatever your users want to use. And this is what Electron Builder does. So basically we can write our Electron and React app in TypeScript. We can take the React app, turn it into HTML using Vite, embed that into Electron, and then build all of that using Electron Builder to, in the end, have a runnable project. And honestly, don't worry if you don't understand all of this yet. Our next step will be building this little foundation right here that will basically set up our React app, build it into HTML, embed it into our Electron process, and then building this Electron process into an app that can run on your system. So an EXE, a DMG, or an app image, depending on what system you're using. And once we've built this, all of this should be a lot clearer. And of course, you can just jump back after building this to this part of the course if you still don't understand everything and want to try to understand it better using your new knowledge that you've gained by developing the actual thing. And after we've developed this foundation, we will of course get into actually developing the stuff we need for the resource manager and also doing some developer experience improvements. But before we start, I would like to add one little disclaimer right here, which is that your operating system will most likely show you one of these warnings when you try to open the build app we're going to create now, which basically tells you that the app wasn't created by a trusted developer. And that is the case because for the operating to actually trust you as a developer, you would need to add a code signing certificate to your app. And this is something you would need to purchase. Your app will still open just fine when the user just clicks, yeah, I trust this app, I accept this. And many production apps, especially open source ones, actually do that. But I just wanted to mention this because I don't want to add anything into this course that you need to pay for. So we will not go into code signing certificates because those can only be obtained with money, which is something that I just don't want to add into this course. Because depending on how you get it and what operating system you're targeting, the process would differ anyways. So just look up the process that you need for your users if you want this warning to disappear. And yeah, if you just don't care, then that's even better. Then you can just follow this course and everything will be just fine. And now that we're in our IDE, we can actually start by creating our UI first. So let's run npm create vite dot in an empty directory. So the dot just says I want to create our Vite project right in the directory I'm currently in. And then we'll choose React because we of course want the React project in TypeScript. And now we just npm install. This shouldn't take up much time, so let's just talk over it real quick. As you can see, the files were already created right here. And now we've got our node modules and we can hit. And then we'll the dot just run. Now that we're in our IDE, we can actually start by creating our UI first. So let's run npm create vite dot in an empty directory. So the dot just says I want to create our Vite project right in the directory I'm currently in. And then we'll choose React because we of course want the React project in TypeScript. And now we just npm install. This shouldn't take up much time, so let's just talk over it real quick. As you can see, the files were already created right here. And now we've got our node modules and we can hit npm run dev to actually start our project. Now if we just control click onto this link right here, we can see here is our Vite and React project. But we might want to optimize this a bit because right now everything is directly in the source directory. But of course we'll also have some Electron code, which will also live in the source directory. So let's try to split this up a bit by creating a UI folder in here and basically moving everything that's currently in the source directory into that UI folder. Now, just to doing this will of course not work yet because Vite needs to know where our code is now. So let's just head into the index.html, which is basically the entry point for Vite to know where all your files are. And here we can see we've got a script tag that references source main.tsx. And of course this needs to be source/ui/main.tsx now. And now if we just hit npm run dev again, we should be able to see that everything is still working just fine. But of course, we've also got this public folder right here, which we don't really need right now either, because we're not going to have a favicon or whatever if we basically embed our app inside of a desktop app. So let's just get rid of this thing right now by removing it and also heading into the app.tsx right now because it also references it, removing this A inside of this. And now if we just look into our app again, we should be able to see that our Vite app is still fully functional, even though we of course removed the favicon and this icon right here. Now let's also change some stuff about the build, because if I just run npm run build right now, we should be able to see that it creates a dist directory that contains all of our output. So basically the finished HTML and JavaScript. This is good in some ways, but for our use case, it isn't as good because Electron Builder will also create a dist directory. So these will conflict, which we don't really want. So let's just change the Vite config a bit more by saying build, and our build will have an out dir. So basically, where do I want to put my finished output? And this will just be dist-react, just so we know where our code is. And now let's just quickly remove the current dist directory, run npm run build again. And now we should be able to see that dist react is created and it still contains all of this normal code. Code right here. Of course, right now it's actually tracked by Git, which you don't really want. So let's also head into the Git ignore and add dist react into the ignored folders, just so you never commit it, because that wouldn't really make sense. And to now combine this UI with our Electron app, we of course need to first of all install Electron. So let's just run npm install -- save dev Electron. We can actually install Electron as a dev dependency because it isn't needed in the final bundle of our app, so the exe or whatever. It is only needed to build it. So even though we will be importing stuff from Electron, it isn't actually required to install it as a normal dependency. A dev dependency is plenty. And do also make sure that you set type module in your package.json. This should be set automatically by Vite, but sometimes it isn't for specific Vite versions. So just make sure that it is set, because otherwise we can't use ES module syntax inside of our Electron code, which we will need to do. And now let's actually get into configuring our Electron app. So let's create a new folder inside of our source directory called Electron. And in here, we'll add a new file called main.js. We will turn this into TypeScript later on, but for now, JavaScript is easier. And here we can just import from Electron, and we'll need two things. First of all, the app. And the browser window. And here what we can do is basically interact with the app. So as soon as we import it, Electron will do all of its magic to basically create an app that we can interact with. And here we can say app.on, so waiting for an event on the app. And we'll say once the app is ready, we want to run this arrow function. And in here we can say, okay, the app is ready now, let's create a window. And that window will be our main window, and it is a new browser window. This browser window can be configured in many, many ways. So we can set stuff like width or whatever. All of this isn't required for now. We'll get into it later. So for now, we'll just add an empty config object in here and leave it at that. And then we can just say main window.load file. And the file that we are going to load is, of course, our index.html file inside of the dist react directory. So you can imagine that people will have this project in different directories on their computer. Because once you distribute it, you can't be sure that it's under whatever directory your code is under. It definitely won't be. So people could have it under program files on Windows or applications on a Mac, or maybe even in the downloads folder if you distribute it using an exe with nothing else. So you need some way to know where your project is currently running from. And the app object actually gives you a helper for that, which is called app.getAppPath. And now we of course just need to append /dist react /index.html to this, and everything is fine, right? Well, not actually, because these slashes only work on Mac and Linux, while Windows requires backslashes for paths. But we don't need to do this ourselves, because Node actually includes a nice module called path. So you don't need to install this because it's already included in the standard library set. And what it can do is do all of this magic for you. So you can just run path.join, And we can just say I want to join our app path with /dist-react/index.html. And now we of course need a way to run this as well, right? So let's try to configure that as well by heading into our package.json and first of all telling it where our main script is. So this main attribute is basically telling Electron which script to run when booting up. And this will of course be source/electron/main. So our main file right here will run once Electron starts. And of course, we will need a dev script for that as well. So let's just rename the first dev script we got to dev::react and add another one, which is going to be dev electron. And it will just run electron dot. So start an Electron process in the current directory and take this main script right here. And now let's just try that out real quick. npm run dev electron. And as you can see, we get it out real quick. npm run dev electron. And as you can see, we got a blank window. Well, why is that? We can just head to, and now let's in the current directory and take this another one dot right. We can just head to the view up here on a Mac, or if you're using Windows, then this should be in a menu bar right under this bar up here. It should be in a menu bar here on a Mac, or if you're using Windows, then this should be in a menu bar right under this bar up here. And we can just run view toggle developer tools to see the normal developer tools and get our error. And we can see it didn't find a file. So what are the tools here? This should be in a menu bar right under this bar up here. And we can just run view toggle developer tools to see the normal developer tools here. And we can just run view toggle developer tools to see the normal developer tools and get our error. And we can see it didn't find a file. So what did it try to request? Let's just reload real quick. And we can see it tried to get file, assets, index, blah. That isn't what we need because, of course, the assets directory isn't on the root of our computer, which is what it tried to get right now. It is actually in the... And we can see it didn't find a file. So what did it try to request? Let's just reload real quick. And we can see it tried to get file, assets, index, blah. That isn't what we need because, of course, the assets directory isn't on the root of our computer, which is what I tried to get right now. It is actually in a relative position to our index.html. So if we just head into the index.html right here, we can see it tries to require /assets/index, which is exactly what we saw. But of course, on a Mac, slash means the root of the file system, which is not what we want. We actually want ./assets in both of these positions right here. So how do we actually solve this? Well, it's actually quite simple. We can just go into a vite config right here and say the base path of our project is ./ instead of slash. And now if we just npm run build again to basically recreate this index.html file and wait a moment for it to be created, then we can now run the Electron app again, wait a few seconds, and we should see that our UI is now fully loaded inside of our window. And of course, all the React state is also still working. And now what we've got is basically a local Electron app that can use our local UI with some local state, of course, as well, that is fully interactive using React. We actually want ./assets in both of these positions right here. So how do we actually solve this? Well, it's actually quite simple. We can just go into a vite config right here and say the base path of our project is ./ instead of slash. And now if we just npm run build again to basically recreate this index.html file and wait a moment for it to be created, then we can now run the Electron app again, wait a few seconds, and we should see that our UI is now fully loaded inside of our window. And of course, all the React state is also still working. And now what we've got is basically a local Electron app that can use our local UI with some local state, of course, as well, that is fully interactive using React. And yeah, it just creates this awesome little window. So next up, let's get into actually configuring this with TypeScript to prevent some errors in the future. And luckily, it's actually quite simple to convert all of this to TypeScript, especially because we've already got TypeScript installed, because as you can see, the vite project already contains a tsconfig. We are not going to use this because as you can see, the vite project already contains a tsconfig. We are not going to use this TypeScript config though, because it expects front-end code, which we don't really have in our Electron app. It's just a node project. So the first thing we're going to do is tell the project, so the vite project basically, to exclude source/electron. The vite project already contains a tsconfig. We are not going to use this TypeScript config though, because it expects TypeScript, especially because we've already got TypeScript installed, because as you can see, the vite project already contains a tsconfig. We are not going to use this TypeScript config though, because it expects front-end code, which we don't really have in our Electron app. It's just a node project. So the first thing we're going to do is tell the project, so the vite project basically, to exclude source/electron. Which means that we're going to define our own TypeScript config for the Electron code right here. So go to the Electron directory, create a new file, tsconfig.json. And this way we can basically now tell TypeScript what it should do to exactly those files inside the Electron directory. So let's just turn this file right here, the main.js, into a main.ts and define a little type in here. Type test equals string, just so we've got some TypeScript code here that would create an error if it was tried to run using JavaScript, because JavaScript doesn't know what a type is. And then we'll just add some config in here. So this config will simply just be all of this. So basically, what should the TypeScript compiler do to our code, and what should it expect from our code? So what this will do is basically tell TypeScript okay, here are all of my Electron TypeScript files. Please convert them to JavaScript using the following directives and put them into our out dir. So let's go through all of this. First of all, we are enabling strict mode. This is something you should do with basically all of your new projects, because strict mode enables you to have null safety and all of that stuff, which is really helpful. And when you're creating a new project, you should basically always set strict mode to true. Then we're telling TypeScript to create ES module syntax. So basically import and export instead of require and module.export. This is because Electron expects us to use ES modules in the newest versions, especially because our Vite project also says that it's a module. So we of course want TypeScript to generate an ES module, which is best done using ES next as a target. And then we'll also tell TypeScript that our code will be written in ES module syntax by using module. So basically we're telling TypeScript, hey, we're going to create a node project using ES next, basically. And this will tell it, hey, convert my ES module code to ES module code. Don't convert anything, basically. Just remove all of the types. Then, of course, we need some place to put our generated JavaScript files, because TypeScript will basically just copy our TypeScript code, remove all the types, and paste it somewhere else. And this will be 2 folders up from our tsconfig. So 1 folder would be source. 2 folders is basically on the same level as this dist react code. As you can see, I've already played around a bit, so we can actually see dist electron right here. And then we'll also have ignore errors from dependencies. So basically, skip libcheck will say if any of our dependencies don't match these rules right here. So for example, they aren't using strict mode. Then we of course still want to be able to build our code. And for that to work, we will need to tell it, hey, don't check if the libraries support all your TypeScript recommendations. They are JavaScript anyway, so let's just ignore all of that and use them just the way they are. You wouldn't want your project to not build after all if you just have a dependency in there that doesn't support what TypeScript expects it to. Now we will of course also need to somehow tell TypeScript that it should run this config. And for that, we'll just add another script to our package.json, which will be transpile electron. And transpile electron will just run the TypeScript compiler using the project we just defined, so source electron tsconfig, which will basically just compile all TypeScript files inside of the electron directory, which is a really simple way to handle things. So now let's just try that out. So I'll just remove which run the package that it should run this config. And for that, we'll just add another script to our package.json, which will be transpile electron. And transpile electron will just run the TypeScript compiler using the project we just defined, so source electron tsconfig, which will basically just compile all TypeScript files inside of the electron directory. Which is a really simple way to handle things. So now let's just try that out. So I'll just remove my existing dist electron directory. And run npm run transpile electron. And now after actually saving electron. And now after actually saving, we should see that when it runs, our new directory is created, which is up here, dist electron, and it contains our main.js. So now we of course also need to tell electron that it should electron and see that when it electron. And now after actually saving, we should see that when it runs, our new directory is created, which is up here, dist electron, and it contains our main.js. So now we of course also need to tell electron that it should run the generated file and not the one in the source directory, which is really easy. We'll just change this main bit right here from source/electron to dist-electron/main. And now if we just npm run dev electron, we should see that everything is still working, even though we now actually have TypeScript code. And if we just head into our main.js, we can see it's basically the same code as before, just without the type we just defined. So now there's just one more thing we need to do so that we don't commit anything that we don't want. We need to exclude this electron from our git tracked files by heading into the git ignore and basically doing the same as we did with dist react, just adding dist electron into here, saving. And now our Electron project can just use TypeScript without us needing to worry about just about anything, which is really, really helpful. And now there's basically just one more step we need to do until our app is ready to be developed on, which is setting up Electron Builder. So let's npmi save dev Electron Builder. And after it's done, we can actually already create a config for it. So in many documentations, you will find that people add a build property into the package.json and put the config in here. This is fine, but it's not as easy to differentiate as if you had a separate config for Electron Build. So this is what we're going to do. We're going to create a new file called electron-builder.json, and that config will contain a few settings. It's going to be an app ID. The app ID is basically a normal standardized way of naming your app. So it starts with com, then your company or personal name. In my case, it's going to be n-Ziermann, and then your app name. So something like prepare for my course preparations, or something like Electron course, for example, like this. Then we're going to define what files should be included in our app. So of course, this should be our source code, so our JavaScript